Chris, we continue to read and hear about the restaurant industry being so hard hit by all the shutdowns required because of coronavirus and social distancing. And even though it's a kind of a moving target, but what are you seeing? What do some of the numbers look like?
So context, the industry last year, Americans spent about $940 billion on food and beverage in a food service environment. Only two-thirds of that is restaurants, though. The rest is college, university, K through 12, also down very dramatically, obviously, healthcare, et cetera. Of that 650, there are a couple of really big numbers that got a lot of play, which I think were too high. The National Restaurant Association, I think, originally projected $225 billion drop in 3 months. They've recently dialed that back a little bit. And again, that's not restaurants, that's the whole industry. And I think Tom Colicchio, the famous chef, said to a reporter, 75% of restaurants are going to close. Love Tom Colicchio. That number's not based on data. He just made up a number. It's going to be bad, though. I think the last 5 recessions, the industry didn't shrink in 4 of them in terms of real dollars, with inflation a little bit. In 2009, it did shrink by 1.2%. We're projecting now shrinkage of between 14 and 28% total revenue. And that range depends on when the shelter at home stops. So we originally were saying 11 to 28%, but that 11% assumed that mid-April shelter at home stops. And so it's clearly not stopping this month. So we're expecting from revenue, somewhere in the 15 to 30% range, call it. In terms of restaurant closures, I mean, there's 650,000 restaurants in the United States. We're anticipating a net loss of about 15%. Now, that doesn't mean 15% will close. Significantly more will close, but a whole bunch are going to reopen. There's going to be some healthier concepts that take advantage of some of the real estate that gets freed up. But look, like you said, it's a moving target, and but we feel pretty good about the 15% as a total drop in restaurants. But that's a net loss, not a gross loss.
Is there a way to characterize these losses into buckets, like types or sizes of restaurants, geography, anything like that?
Yeah, all of them. Service types is the biggest one, I think. So you've got quick serve restaurants and full serve restaurants, quick serve restaurants, fast food, but also fast casual like Chipotle, et cetera. And full service, which would be anything from casual dining to fine dining to most independent restaurants. Quick serve is doing so much better than full serve. They have drive-throughs, first of all, which is huge. They have moved much more aggressively and earlier to delivery. They were in a position to take advantage of that. And they're less expensive. And we're probably in the throes of a very deep recession right now. Full service is going to struggle more, certainly. The other way you look at it is chains and independents. And independents do tend to be more full service oriented. 80% of all independent restaurants are full service restaurants. They're struggling. And then I think the other thing, regardless, whether or not you're a chain or full service or anything else, you needed to be strong financially entering into this, and you needed cash reserves, and you needed access to capital. And so you might even see franchisees at stronger concepts that are going to struggle because they went into the downturn in a rough spot. Peter Romeo, one of the editors of Restaurant Business magazine, which is one of ours, and he has a great observation, which is certain concepts went into this with a pre-existing condition, to use the language of the moment. And if that pre-existing condition was highly leveraged, low margin, this outbreak is more likely to put you out than not.
The more restaurants we talk to, I mean, it sounds like so many of them do operate on thin margins. If you had to describe, I mean, other than lack of cash, which is the obvious one, what are the pain points that some of the restaurants in all categories are facing?
I mean, it's really just one pain point, which is a catastrophic loss of revenue. And I mean, look, some McDonald's as an example reported 22% same-store sales down. That's globally, and that's for the month of March, and that's pretty bad. It's not 100% though, obviously. But obviously, we're now. I think we're tracking at about 50% of all restaurants are temporarily closed. Right? That's a 100% drop in revenue. So it really does come down to that much. That simple. That just a complete evaporation, destruction of revenue, coupled with, well, do you have the means to weather the storm?
And how are you seeing the ones that are surviving, even if it's a big drop? What are the things they're doing to stay alive and work their way through this?
Well, the good news, and there is some sort of good news in this. One is that unlike other segments of retail, food service restaurants have been classified as a essential business. So a lot of them are open. Clothing stores aren't open. Your nail salon isn't open. We all need a haircut. So restaurants are a little lucky in that they can be open. They've got three main sources of expenses. One of them is labor. That's dropped dramatically, sadly, as many staff has been let go or furloughed. The second is food and beverage supplies. So, everything you get from your distributors. That has dropped considerably to zero if you're closed. And the third is rent. And rent is an interesting one. I don't think, I think it was interesting when Cheesecake Factory was sort of the first chain people have heard of to say, we won't be paying our rent April 1st. And there's a lot of funny stuff on Twitter about who knew Cheesecake Factory would be leading the revolution when it came. So all those three groups of people that restaurants have to give most of their money to all have a vested interest in that restaurant survival. And so, there is, so a big mitigating point is expenses vanishing, or at least shrinking dramatically, or maybe who you owe the money can work with you. Beyond that, obviously, we've talked about delivery, which was already a big thing going into this. Curbside pickup is become huge. It's interesting to watch. This is where the location of your restaurant comes into play, right? If you have a restaurant that's in a mall on the third floor, you're not doing curbside pickup, right? But if you have a standalone restaurant with a curb, you can do curbside pickup. So a lot of these factors are coming into play, but there's also a lot of look, great calamity usually inspires innovation, right? You're seeing restaurants do grocery type business now because they've got this food that's going to waste. Subway has sort of pivoted to grocery with its perishable produce. You see some restaurants trying to create the dining out experience in. I know there's a concept in China that moved to sort of a fondue at home type experience, and so you are seeing some interesting innovation. And great calamity often inspires that. Certainly, war does, and this will too.
Yeah, and I see with the ability some more flexibility, let's say around selling alcohol. It creates an environment where that, come pick up a night out and bring it in has become a something that we're hearing as well.
Yeah, and something that would have been unthinkable a month ago, the idea that you can do takeout booze and a six-pack with your pizza, fixins for cocktails. I think there was a meme going around that, not too long ago, in our grandparents' lifetime at least, alcohol was illegal. Now it's deemed an essential business. And, well, thank God for that.
You talked about some of the experiences that restaurants have in takeout. Some of them have had to figure that out, and not just because of their location, but just the technology, whether that's contactless payments or even some of the smaller restaurants that don't do any takeout business, creating some kind of e-commerce experience. What have you heard? And many of them have done it pretty quickly. Like, what have you heard in terms of their ability to, flip a switch on so quickly?
I think that probably one of the things that to restaurant operators is a big deal that to people people outside the restaurant industry look at restaurants and they think mostly of the food, obviously, the ambiance, the atmosphere. But for the restaurant operator, we use the word operator for a reason. Operations is king. And it's been interesting to watch Darden in particular. So Darden's the biggest full service restaurant company in the world. Olive Garden is their largest chain, but they have Capitol Grill and Bahama Breeze and 52 Seasons, a whole bunch. They're going to be an interesting case study as a chain that pivoted really beautifully I think they had 86. So whenever I say any number on this Zoomcast, it might be right. I'm in the ballpark. I think they had like 86% same store sales drop the first week of shelter at home, and I don't remember the number, but they pivoted to delivery and curbside quickly and effectively. That's a company that is operationally at the top of their game. And but yeah, a lot of them are doing it with band-aids and rubber bands right now, and week by week, look, we're all doing it, right? I mean, hopefully everyone's doing takeout and eating out. I've seen the places I go to every week, they get a little better. And but it's all ad hoc innovation right now, except for those that were already big into delivery, and this is going to continue, I think, for a few years. They'll sort of move their game real time to real delivery.
One of the other things they've had to figure out is sanitization, and most restaurants know that from having to be sanitary in the first place, right? But they've had to effectively tell people the steps that they're taking, and they've had to actually take those steps, extra training. What have you seen restaurants doing in this regard?
So Technomic, again, our research arm, has actually been surveying restaurants and consumers repeatedly throughout this. And right now, they're saying about roughly half of the operators they're talking to have upped all parts of their game, retraining their employees, greater sanitization of all the everything within the restaurant, et cetera. Think about how hard that is, though. They're doing it while their business is falling apart, right? Everyone's at health risk, and now they're introducing this as well. And I don't know, some heroic work is happening, I think. But I think when all is said and done, it's going to be interesting to see what lasts. I don't know. Did you watch the latest season of Curb Your Enthusiasm?
I did not.
Oh, you must. It is incredibly funny. But anyway, Larry David opens a restaurant called Larry's Lattes. It's a spite store. He's opening it just purely because he's mad at the guy who owns a coffee store next door. And he was onto something. I mean, right now there are a lot of entrepreneurs, I think, thinking about what a post-coronavirus restaurant looks like. And Larry David hit on it last year. I mean, it's essentially a restaurant designed by a germaphobe for germaphobes, with antibacterial, on every table. That's going to be on the table now, perhaps next to your ketchup and mustard. But Larry was there first.
I like it. Let's talk a little bit about some of the relief that's being provided, and I think in the restaurant industry, at least I've seen some of the greatest examples of that. You've got CORE, which I think stands for relief for children of restaurant employees.
Mm-hmm.
And you had the Great American Takeout, which is still going on. The National Restaurant Association has a relief fund. There's a James Beard effort. Lots of communities coming together to support their local establishments. What are you seeing?
Yeah, most of the things you've talked about, plus some of the government initiatives like the Paycheck Protection Program and the CARES Act, which apply to all small businesses. But most restaurants are small businesses, and not just your local place, but even your local McDonald's is likely a franchisee that is a small business, so fits under a lot of this. Restaurants have a big advantage again over your apparel store or your nail salon, is that there's a romance to the restaurant industry. We all we love our restaurants that we go to. We feel we have a special connection to it. It's been interesting to see. I have even friends who even before I started sort of rallying everyone I know to support their local restaurants, that were going out of their way to dine out at the restaurants they liked in their town to make sure they could survive this. And We're particularly supporting the National Restaurant Association's their efforts, and we want to focus our efforts, our organization, particularly on employees who've been battered, and that's one of the places we're going to be putting our efforts at Winsight.
The inspirational stories of whether it's innovation or people lending a hand are pretty incredible. What are some of your favorites so far? I promise not to make you cry and
I
tell me.
know. I did something last week where I was talking about, but this one story, and I did get a little choked. We've all gotten choked up a lot these days, haven't we?
Sure.
I think one of my favorites was, I think I first saw it in New Jersey, and then it extended some other places, and then it got stopped in some places. Is people calling their local restaurants and placing orders to deliver to healthcare workers. I am going to get a little choked up. All right, we'll edit that, right? Anyway, and it's like everyone wins, right? The restaurant gets a little bit of much needed revenue. The healthcare workers get their meals paid for and delivered, and those of us who feel useless feel like we can do something anyway. And that was probably my favorite one that touched me quite a bit.
Yeah, there are a lot of people reaching deep to make those things happen. It is very inspirational. How does the restaurant industry emerge from this? I mean, other than sanitizer on every table,
Yeah.
what new ideas do you see coming from this? How will the restaurant businesses build resilience so they have more cash? I mean, let's hope there's not another pandemic anytime soon, but certainly everybody's kind of feeling like they need to build a little bit of resilience into their business. But what does it all look like?
Well, to use one of our favorite words of the moment, pivoting, as I pivot from sort of, sensitive person to ruthless business person, um, there are too many restaurants, and there have been for some time. About 10,000 restaurants shut down during the Great Recession, and we have built far too many since then. We're building restaurants faster than we're growing population, and so everyone in the industry has expected that when the next recession came, there would be a shutdown of restaurants, and it was sort of necessary. We're trying to spread too little business among too many restaurants, and so part of what right now everyone's losing, but I think what's going to happen is there will actually be some winners and losers. You've got restaurant chains, 30 or 40, 50 restaurant chains who have barely shown a profit for 10 years, and they always find investment somehow. That they're going to go away, and well-funded, higher margin concepts with stronger consumer demand, like Shake Shack is an example. Is going to sort of be interested in their vacated real estate positions. There's going to be, there's a decent chance that we're going to see record numbers of restaurant closings in the next year, and also record numbers of openings. And some of that will be existing strong concepts. Others will be maybe, this is always an endlessly creative industry. Like I said, someone's in their work at home environment right now, drawing plans for new restaurants, and that will open. You're going to see some different, I think, architectural approaches. There was something that was already starting to happen, which was smaller dining rooms, bigger kitchens, right? Because if you're doing a lot of takeout or you're doing off-premise or any kind of, think about Chili's to go as an example, right? So Chili's has built, this little side door where you can go and do your takeout. Well, most Chili's restaurants or anyone like them, they built their dining room and their kitchen to scale. Well, what if you're serving more meals than the size of your dining room, and not as many people are dining out, or maybe even less after this is over? Well, maybe you start to scale that kitchen dining room a little bit differently. You may have to also factor in that people are not going to want to be piled on top of each other in the near future. So I think there's going to be we're going to see some design changes. We're going to see probably some things that will some things are going to go away forever, I think. I don't know. You're going to see a lot of salad bars in the future. I'm thinking not. We talked to a lot of college and university food service directors who are already going to phase them out in a big way. And but there's stuff we haven't thought of yet, and that's what I always talk about. Calamity inspires ingenuity. We're going to see some stuff that none of us have thought of yet.
In talking with some restaurants, especially in places like New York and LA, where the rents are just so high, asked like out of proportion to anywhere else in the country, the cost of space as a percentage of your overall spend is dramatically higher. And with restaurants, obviously, some of them closing, some of them refusing to pay rent, some of them maybe going out of business. Do you think that that will change how the maybe the better way will rents go down? So,
I mean, you have to assume so, right? I think, and we might also see a really radical change in how companies use office space. You know, there are a lot of CFOs right now realizing, oh, we can all work from home. Interesting. Why do I have that gigantic rent on my my balance sheet every year? Yeah, so there's this interesting, everyone, of course, we have a lot of people who have maybe simplistic ideas about how economies work, and that, hey, I just won't pay the landlord and screw him. Well, guess what? The landlord owes the lender money, right? So there is this sort of cycle that happens. You can't just not pay the landlord and think everything's going to be fine for the landlord either. It's and then you've got the franchisor-franchisee relationships. You've got this sort of interesting mix of everyone is in it together, to use another of the cliches of the moment. The tenant, the landlord, the lender, they're all sort of dependent upon each other a bit. But it's certainly reasonable to assume we're going to see some decreases in rent. And my old boss, I don't know if he was ever your boss, but I think Don Pizzo was the first person who said the line to me, if I owe you $1, I have a problem. If I owe you $1 million, we both have a problem. And the tenants and the landlords and the lenders, they all have a problem, and they're going to have to somehow work together to solve it.
Chris, you and I have talked about ghost kitchens or cloud kitchens. You spoke earlier about new architectures, new dining arrangements. Could that be something that takes off in this sort of environment?
Yeah, definitely. And again, it's so hard to project how the consumer is going to act. Are we going to return to normal 6 months from now, 12 months from now, or is there some permanence to some of the ways we approach dining? You have to bet that there's going to be, for some consumers, some permanence, which means a significant demand for off-premise dining. And all of a sudden, ghost kitchens, which is this idea of no retail face, just a commissary essentially through which you operate a delivery business. Boy, it starts to make a lot of sense. The trick in there, it'll be interesting to see if diners' attitudes towards brands change, though, right? Because we tend not to like generic food, right? We get attached to a brand. We might like a sandwich from a local deli or a sandwich chain. Everyone likes to, no one will admit how much they love McDonald's, but we spend $40 billion there every year. We love McDonald's. And so a lot of these ghost kitchens will be connected to restaurants, and there's still that sort of brand component, which is going to be interesting. But yeah, I think the idea of spending even less on rent by not having a retail facing operation, particularly with the future of malls sort of in an interesting spot now. Retail shopping is a big driver of food service as well, and obviously there's a lot of restaurants and malls. This idea of having these lower rent, non-retail facing places to just drive your cooking for delivery is an idea that may start to accelerate.
Sure. I want to end with this notion of where we come out of this, who wins, what type of food, what happens to labor, where, make some predictions for us.
Well, anyone who thinks or says they know what's going to happen is a liar or a fool, or both. But that doesn't stop us from guessing. I think that on the food side, so there's two arguments on the sort of what happens with menu and dining, right? One is that and you see it in what we're buying at retail now, right? You can't find any baking goods on the shelves, right? So this sort of comfort food, indulgence, we're seeing a little bit now. Will that continue, or will we come out of this with a little more of a New Year's resolution approach that I need to eat healthier now? But I think what we really believe is we're going to be most likely in a deep and I don't want to say prolonged, I don't know, but certainly there's going to be high unemployment for some period of time. And we know from 2009 what that does is it drives value purchasing in food service. And so I think there's going to be this sort of mix of value and indulgence with not much middle ground. The middle ground is at risk. Casual dining is some, not all. There are certainly thriving casual dining restaurants, but they sometimes are at risk of that middle ground. QSR can drive that value and convenience. The very best independent fine dining restaurants will always be fine in certain places anyway, but there's going to be a little bit of that sort of low end and high end might do a little bit better than the middle, I think. As far as labor goes, boy, this is a really interesting one because we just went from historically low unemployment to historically high unemployment, like that, right? I mean, just overnight. And so if you asked any restaurant operator pre-corona what was their biggest problem, it was finding, training, and keeping good people. Well, with now 13% likely higher unemployment, well, you should be able to do that, right? Except that at least in the short term, the unemployment benefits are very generous. They actually project to about a $50,000 a year salary, which is very hard for restaurants, especially in certain parts of the country, to compete with. So it might make more financial sense for some people to stay home and collect unemployment until it runs out than to go back to work and take a pay cut. So now think about that confused and strange and unprecedented labor situation while you're trying to reopen a restaurant, which is something also you've never done before. So as someone said recently, we've been using the word unprecedented an unprecedented amount of times lately, and this is all new ground for people. So we'll see.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see what happens. Hopefully, we come out of this quickly, and certainly for restaurants, we'll all be hungry and wanting to get out and do something normal again.
Yeah, and I hope everyone at least supports their favorite local restaurants. So when this is all over, they still have their favorite local restaurant.
That's right. Chris, thank you so much.
Thanks, Fritz.